So joining us now to talk about the man who will soon become the 47th president of the United States is Gwenda Blair, who is a biographer and author of The Trumps, 3 generations of builders and a president. Gwenda, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So I want to talk about this generational thought here and this idea that his family upbringing is so important to who he is as a man and as a president, and you document that well.
His grandfather came here in 1885 and brought a kind of just young enough to escape mandatory military service. He later tried to repatriate back to Germany with a nest egg that he'd put together in the U.S., in the Yukon, actually, during the gold rush, in order to, and he wanted to repatriate. He was just a little too old to do military service. He said that that was coincidence. The German government said, no, you were draft dodging. That was a kind of transactional predecessor act, and it's been the same ever since through his father, who made a fortune in federal subsidies during the 30s and 40s with estimating costs that somehow or other, on which basis he would get the subsidies, and somehow or other he came in later under those costs, and very transactional, and Donald himself has been the transactional figure of our time.
And you talk about this idea of sort of ruthlessly pursuing any advantage.
Absolutely. If there's a rule there, it can be gotten around. His grandfather built a hotel on land that didn't belong to him. His father, again, had those sort of windfall profits that he got by overestimating the costs of what it would cost, what would it take to do housing with federal subsidies during the 30s, 40s, 50s. And Donald himself, he's gotten around the bankruptcy system. He's gotten around everything. He's gotten around the legal system. He's very good at figuring the way around.
Gwenda, can you talk a little bit about taking all of that background, the characteristics he learned from his father, and he expanded upon? Why is he so relatable to so many people?
There's an old saying, some people say it was from P.T. Barnum, you want a crowd, start a fight. And Trump is very good at that, at riling people up, at appealing to their sense of drama, of controversy, of conflict, that is just so much more compelling and dramatic than a kind of everything is okay. He's a very good salesman. He gets what people want to hear, not what they might perhaps say they want to hear, but what they really want to hear. And what they really want to hear is, you're right, the system is rigged, it's not your fault, you don't have everything you want. I've been on the inside. I know how it works. I can fix it. That's a message that obviously really resonated.
And I know you talk about not just the message, but the way it's delivered in this very casual, I'm speaking directly to each person as an individual.
Absolutely. He has a very sort of intimate way of speaking to very large crowds. A way of sounding like he's like standing right next to you, and he's kind of going back and forth. He's inconsistent. He's thinking out loud. He's not preaching to you, telling you what to do. That's what he's very good at putting that across, and a kind of channeling, a kind of, inner rebelliousness, a kind of really wanting to see that kid throw the spitball at the teacher. He's harnessed that. And even something like during his campaign rally, when he just stopped talking and started dancing, that was such a kind of, I can do whatever I want attitude, which people have found very compelling.
Gwenda, this is Paul. I'm curious, Trump comes to all of this, of course, from the business community, but egos are big there, but egos are also big on Capitol Hill and among politicians. The first time around, you saw Trump show deference to the political side of things. This time around, it's not so clear that he would. Can you talk about what you anticipate in the interplay between the political side, which doesn't seem to be putting up a guardrail to block something the businessman will do, and the businessman, incoming President Trump, who clearly now has his own very strong agenda?
Back when he was just doing real estate, when he was on the 26th floor of Trump Tower in New York, his MO, his kind of business model was what sometimes is referred to as kind of a hub and spokes. He's the hub, everybody else is a spoke. Everybody reported to him. And he set people against each other. That was a really important part of it. So nobody knew if they were going to get fired. It really eliminated the idea of kind of horizontal alliances. Everybody had to report to him. And he's taken that same model, greatly amplified, obviously, as president of the United States. The first time he was in office, he hadn't quite gotten his head around how big the bureaucracy is, how many layers there are, what had to be done. So that didn't quite altogether work. This time, he's had 4 years to think about it, 4 years of getting it polished, and he's ready to roll, he says, we'll see, with being able to implement things immediately, where all this, he is the hub again, and the spokes are basically the country, but certainly the federal government, where everybody's going to be directly responsible to him. And the idea is to eliminate any kind of horizontal allegiances, alliances, obstacles, opposition, conflicts, to eliminate those.
And I know that's something you talk about in depth in your book, the supreme importance of self-confidence, which I mentioned earlier. As he walked in today, the president-elect seemed to have a lot more confidence, where in his business dealings, he always had. You think about even all of these court proceedings that he has had. Most people would be intimidated by those, but he's been involved in more than 3,500, you say, and he's like, I can beat this too.
The book, The Power of Positive Thinking, that came out in the 1950s, was written by Norman Vincent Peale, was a very important book to many Americans and absolutely to his parents. His father was a very self-confident guy, and that whole kind of message of having an image of yourself as successful, holding on to it, never let it go, hold on to it tenaciously. I love that adverb. That's what Norman Vincent Peale said. Donald Trump took that to heart and never let the idea of any sort of failure cross your mind. He took that to heart. Norman Vincent Peale did not talk about revenge, retribution, eliminate your enemy, crush them. He did not say that, but Trump has added that as kind of like the Trump corollary to that idea and has held on to it. And with the help of Roy Cohn, kind of the infamous fixer during the McCarthy period and later, he took on the idea that you can roll over it, get past it, get around it, if you just keep repeating your talking points, talk in a louder voice, don't let go, and very important, be large, be a celebrity, project yourself as kind of, a titan, a magnate. He spent the earlier part of his career doing that. And he bought an airline, he bought a football team, he bought Mar-a-Lago, did all sorts of things to project the notion of himself as huge and just a dynamite, incredibly successful. And with that building of that brand, he was able to roll over everything since then.
Gwenda, final question in that framework. Is he laying the groundwork, planting the seeds for one of his children to have a political career as well in the days, weeks, and months, years ahead?
He certainly has given a prominent spots to his children. During his first campaign for president in 2016, his children were everywhere. They've been everywhere again. And his notion of a dynasty seems to be unfolding. exactly who's going to be the most prominent figures in that. I don't think we know yet, but he's got 5 children. His kids have a lot of children. And the name Trump is one that he has really spent his time building into a world brand of success and power. And now that he has being inaugurated today, that only makes it seem, shine more brightly.
Certainly
And
done,
that
Trump.
branding, that notion of branding,
Yes.
that was his key insight.
Certainly Don Trump Jr. has become a real critical figure this year. Gwenda Blair, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate you joining us.